Hello again. My name is Veronica from Punkfish Diving and Punkfish Academy. And today we want to go into one more interesting subject in our Nitrox course. You know, you can get your SSI Nitrox certification online with us. And this is one of the materials that we offer as an additional knowledge to the course. So one of the very important discussions around nitrox is if nitrox is less narcotic than air. Because the question is if oxygen has the same narcotic potential than nitrogen or maybe less. So while we have seen that it's an absolute myth that diving with nitrox makes you more awake or fitter after the dive, this one is not so easy. So let's get into it. So the first thing we ask is, how is the relation between nitrogen and oxygen when it comes to the narcotic potential? Because we just have these two gases. And there is a correlation between the narcotic potential of a gas and the solubility in fat. This is what we see here on the right with a lot of gases that are not interesting for us in diving at all, but they are interesting when it comes to anesthesia. So we can see here that nitrogen definitely has a high narcotic potential, but oxygen has even a higher solubility in fat. So there are reasons to believe that oxygen could be as well highly narcotic. The only reason why we don't know a lot of it is that it gets toxic long before it could have a narcotic effect. So this is why there is not so much real knowledge about oxygen narcosis. But as well, there are reasons that maybe it's less narcotic because a big part of the oxygen is metabolized in our body. And then there is this thing that fat solubility is not the only point that makes a gas narcotic. There must be more, which is just not completely known. This is why we have to go to empirics. There are quite some studies done about narcosis and nitrogen and awareness underwater and how people react different when they're breathing air or when they're deep breathing nitrox. So this is interesting for us, but always with a little question marks, because there are two things. The first is that defining what is narcosis is a little bit difficult. So there are studies about like the level of arousal. There are studies about the level of memory. There are a lot of different forms to define that one person is impaired in a certain way underwater, but not every form of impairment underwater is narcosis. So maybe we find out about differences between the two gases, but these differences are not really an effect of narcosis, but it's just the impairment that we have underwater. And the things we can measure are not exactly to the point that this defines narcosis, and now we can measure the one thing that defines narcosis, but it's more that we measure different hints, different things, different forms of impairment, and then say that these impairments are part of the narcosis. So it's not a very clear relation between all these different things we can measure and the narcosis itself. But, however, there are quite some studies that suggest that there is a difference in cognitive function underwater in breathing air or breathing nitrox, and it does look like nitrox has a positive effect on brain functions underwater. So let's have a look on this. One of the examples is testing with critical flicker fusion frequency. What is this? The easiest way to explain is, have a look on this video. You see like this light blinking, blinking, blinking faster and faster and faster. And in some moment, you will just see it as continuous light. it's still blinking. It's just blinking at a very high frequency. And you measure at which point, at which frequency people start to see this light as a continuous light. And the higher this level is, or the higher this number is, the higher is their arousal in this moment. This is at least how we read the result of this little test. And this is something that can be done underwater. So it was done not so long ago, in 2019, with 10 candidates in a dry chamber. So they did do this dive to 30 meters for 20 minutes, either with air or with nitrox 40. For sure, they did not know which gas they were breathing when they did the tests. And they did this test and some more things once they arrived at depth. Then after 15 minutes, when you know narcosis usually kicks in a little bit later, and then again 30 minutes after the dive. And they did more things. They did monitor the brain oxygenation and do a lot of stuff. So it's really worth to read this whole study. I will put the link in the YouTube description as well. What did happen in this? Once arriving at 4 bar pressure, everyone had better results than the 100% baseline. The ones diving with nitrox even higher, but as well the ones with air had better measurable arousal than before on land. But this level of awareness declined, and the ones who were diving nitrox had now like their same attention level throughout the dive and after the dive, while the ones who were on air reached significantly lower levels during the dive and as well after the dive back at the surface. Let's see another example about nitrox and short and long time memory. This is a very beautiful study. It doesn't have the most interesting results in this world, but it was done in real water. We talk here about real dives to 24 meter with 108 participants, and they were shown some pictures and they were asked to memorize these pictures and then repeat what they have seen, like a simple memory test, which is completely doable underwater. And they were asked directly after seeing the images, and then again 30 minutes later after diving 30 more minutes at 24 meter. The result here was, in fact, that the ones diving with nitrox did make less mistakes on the long-term memory. So they seem to have a little bit better long-term memory. But these dives were done with nitrox 28 or air, which means it is very unlikely that the effect of this little difference is really, really big. There might be other reasons for this result. And they were diving at 24 meters. I don't call narcosis the impairments that we have at 24 meters depth. We do have some impairments when diving. We do react a little bit different, and probably we don't really have a proper name for this. But I would not easily attribute this to the narcotic effect of any gas. So I would say this is the main question. When we see all the studies, when we see all these tests, do we really talk about narcosis? Is this really about narcosis? We can find out, or I think we did find out, that impairment underwater is lower when we dive with nitrox. So there seem to be advantages for how our brain works underwater. And that's nice, that's good to know. But this kind of impairment is not necessarily narcosis. So we have all these different forms of being a little bit different underwater, reacting a little bit different underwater, that are more than just a narcotic effect of the gases. the discussion if the oxygen is really narcotic or not is really theoretic, because by the end of the day, you don't want to breathe oxygen with a too high PO2, and this will always limit the oxygen content of your gas, and you will not use a high oxygen gas for dives in a depth where narcosis really plays a significant role. So when we do these dives that go deeper than 40 meters, where we put the recreational limits, then we don't talk about nitrox anymore, we talk about premix and we talk about helium, and we want to substitute both oxygen and nitrogen because both does negatively affect us when diving deeper. So as long as this is theoretical and you stay shallower than 40 meters, just breathe whatever you want to breathe as long as you respect your MOD of 1.4 bar and have fun with it.